Have you ever felt that something was off about someone, but couldn't quite put your finger on it? That nagging feeling in your gut when you're around a certain person, even though they're polite and smiling. Carl Jung dedicated decades to studying this phenomenon and uncovered something deeply disturbing. Covert psychopaths are all around us. They're not the serial killers from the movies. They're people who seem completely normal. Some are even seen as pillars of the community. But behind that perfect social mask, Jung identified 7 unmistakable signs that reveal their true nature. And today, you're going to learn how to recognize each of these signs before it's too late. Carl Jung taught that our intuition is the voice of the unconscious trying to protect us. When you feel that inexplicable unease around someone, it's not paranoia, it's your psyche, detecting something that your conscious mind hasn't yet processed. Jung called this perceiving the shadow through a lack of authenticity. And covert psychopaths are masters at hiding their shadow behind what Jung called the persona, the social mask. But the mask always has cracks. You just need to know where to know. Look, before I reveal the 7 signs, I need to warn you about something important. This is going to completely change the way you see certain people in your life. You might recognize someone close to you, and when that happens, everything will make sense. That relationship that always left you confused, that person who everyone thinks is wonderful, but who makes you feel drained, that co-worker who seems perfect, but something just doesn't add up. Jung said, the shadow is the person you'd rather not be, but covert psychopaths project that shadow onto you. They make you doubt your own perception, and that's why you need to understand these 7 signs. To trust your gut feeling, again. First sign, excessive superficial charm. Jung observed that psychopaths develop an extremely elaborate persona. They're too charming, too agreeable. They seem too perfect. In the beginning, you think you found the most amazing person in the world. They know exactly what to say, how to act, what emotions to demonstrate. But Jung warned, it's like watching a very well-rehearsed theatrical performance. There's no real authenticity. It's all calculated. You notice it because the charm is uniform, applied to everyone the same way. There's no real depth. It's like a layer of shiny paint over rotten wood. And what gives it away even more? The charm disappears the moment it no longer serves their purposes. Let me give you a concrete example. I knew a case years ago, a man who was called the most charismatic person in the office. Everyone loved being around him, always smiling, always with the right story, always offering help. But a colleague started to notice a strange pattern. His charm switched like a light. When he was with the higher-ups, it was one way. With subordinates, completely different. And when he thought no one was looking, his face would go completely blank, expressionless, no life. In his eyes, as if he was switched off. Jung would explain this as persona fatigue. Maintaining a constant mask is exhausting. So, when they think there's no audience, the mask drops for seconds, and you see the real emptiness behind it. That's the first alert. If someone's charm seems too performative, too perfect, you might be dealing with a covert psychopath. Second sign, complete lack of real empathy, disguised as concern. This is one of the hardest to detect because covert psychopaths have learned to imitate empathy perfectly. They say the right things, they make the appropriate facial expressions, they even mimic empathetic body language. Jung called this identification with the persona, without connection to the real self. But their empathy is cognitive, not emotional. They understand intellectually what you're feeling and use that to manipulate. They don't actually feel it. And how do you detect this? Observe the actions, not the words. A covert psychopath might say beautiful things about how much they care, but when you really need them, They disappear, or worse, they use your moment of vulnerability against you later. Jung said that people with real empathy respond emotionally to the suffering of others. You see it in their eyes, in their voice, in their body. There's genuine resonance, but with covert psychopaths, it's like they're reading a script. The words are right, but the soul is missing. A classic example: a woman told me about a friend who always said the kindest things when she was feeling down, seemed extremely empathetic, until one day she discovered that this same friend was spreading her problems as gossip to others, using intimate information that she had shared in moments of vulnerability. The empathy was fake. It was a tool to collect information and create emotional dependence. Jung warned, when someone demonstrates excessive concern, but you never see concrete actions of help, be suspicious. Real empathy translates into action, not just pretty words. But here's something that will make you even more alert. Covert psychopaths not only fake empathy, they also study your emotional reactions. Like scientists studying experiments, they test what hurts you, what makes you happy, what makes you react, not to get to know you better as a genuine person would, but to have a complete map of how to control you. Jung said that their unconscious doesn't have the moral brakes that normal people have. So they use this knowledge without guilt. If they notice that you become insecure when ignored, they'll use silence as a weapon. If they noted that you seek approval, they'll alternate between praise and criticism to keep you dependent. Stay calm, because the part that will protect you the most is coming now. Third sign: pathological lying. Even when the truth would be easier, Jung observed that psychopaths lie differently than normal people. It's not just to protect themselves from consequences. They lie for the pleasure of deceiving, for the sense of superiority that they feel when manipulating the perception of others. And the most disturbing thing, they lie about small and irrelevant things. Things that wouldn't even make a difference if they told the truth. Why? Because for them, controlling the narrative is a game, and the more you believe in small lies, the easier it becomes to make you swallow the big ones. Jung called this fragmentation of the self. They don't have a coherent sense of true identity, so they can change stories, contradict themselves, and not feel any psychological discomfort with it. You detect this by observing inconsistencies in their stories. Over time, the story they told last month doesn't match the version from today. Details change, facts alter, and when you point out the contradiction, they either deny ever saying that before, making you doubt your own memory, or they create an elaborate explanation that confuses you even more. Jung warned, this is psychological gaslighting. They make you question your own sanity, and 3 people ignored this sign. They all deeply regretted it later when they discovered they had been deceived in much bigger ways. One of them lost their life savings by believing the financial lies of a covert psychopath business partner. Another discovered that their significant other had an entirely separate life. The third was unfairly fired because a covert psychopath colleague fabricated a false narrative, so convincing that everyone believed it. But pay attention to a crucial detail that Jung pointed out. Common liars feel guilt, they get nervous, they avoid eye contact, they show physical signs of stress. Covert psychopaths lie, looking directly into your eyes, with a calm voice, without any sign of discomfort, because they genuinely don't feel guilt. For them, deceiving you has no moral weight, it's just a strategy. Jung said that their superego, the part of the psyche that internalizes social and moral rules, either doesn't exist or is extremely weak. So They know intellectually that lying is considered wrong by society, but they don't feel it internally, and that makes them extraordinarily convincing liars. If you notice that someone constantly lies about small things without any sign of discomfort, you might be dealing with a covert psychopath, and now comes one of the most dangerous signs of all. Fourth sign: zero responsibility for their own actions. Jung extensively studied the concept of shadow projection. It's when we attribute to others the negative characteristics that we don't want to recognize in ourselves. Psychopaths do this on an extreme level. Nothing is ever their fault. There's always someone or something else to blame. And, most disturbingly, they manage to make it seem logical. They create narratives where they are always the victims, or the unjustly wronged heroes. You find yourself apologizing for things they did, taking responsibility for problems they created. And somehow, it seems to make sense in the moment. Only later is when you're alone. You think, wait, how did that become my fault? Jung warned. Psychologically healthy people can look at their mistakes, recognize their flaws, feel genuine remorse, and change their behavior. This is part of the individuation process of becoming a complete and mature human being. But covert psychopaths are incapable of this, not because they don't understand that they did wrong, but because deep down, they don't believe that rules apply to them. They are special, superior. Consequences are for ordinary people. A case that perfectly illustrates this: a manager, let's call him Brad, who systematically sabotaged the projects of his subordinates to make himself look good. When confronted with clear evidence, he didn't deny the facts, but he recontextualized everything. He said he was testing the team's resilience, that it was for the good of the company, that anyone who couldn't handle the pressure didn't deserve to be there. He transformed clearly destructive behavior into something that seemed like a leadership strategy, and he convinced many people. Jung would say he projected his own shadow of incompetence and envy onto others, making it seem like they were the problem, not him. And there's a specific pattern you need to know. When covert psychopaths are finally confronted with the inevitable consequences of their actions, they do one of three things. First, they deny it, even with clear evidence, making you doubt reality. Second, they minimize it, saying you're exaggerating, being too sensitive, not understanding the context. Third, they attack you, turning themselves into victims, persecuted by someone cruel who doesn't understand them. And which of these strategies do they use? The one that will work best on you. They read your reactions and adapt. If you're empathetic, they'll play the victim. If you're rational, they'll use distorted logic. If you seek harmony, they'll accuse you of creating drama. Jung taught that people like this impede your process of individuation. They keep you trapped in unhealthy dynamics that block your psychological growth. And you need to understand this, because the next sign reveals how they do this systematically. Fifth sign: gradual and almost imperceptible isolation. This is perhaps the most sinister, because it happens so slowly that you don't notice it until you're completely isolated. Jung studied how psychopaths manipulate the social environment of their victims. They don't come right out and tell you to distance yourself from friends and family. That would be too obvious. Instead, they plant seeds of doubt, subtle comments about how that friend of yours seems envious, observations about how your family doesn't really understand you, suggestions that co-workers are talking about you behind your back, all wrapped in false concern. I'm telling you this because I care about you. I don't want you to get hurt. And gradually, you start to pull away from people, believing that you're protecting yourself, when in reality, you're falling exactly into their trap. Jung explained this through the concept of archetypes. Psychopaths activate the archetype of the savior. positioning themselves as the only person who really understands and protects you, while painting everyone else as the archetype of the enemy or the traitor. And your unconscious, seeking safety, accepts this narrative, especially if you already have wounds of abandonment or betrayal from the past. They identify these wounds and exploit them. A devastating example: a woman, let's call her Jessica, realized that after 2 years with her partner, she no longer had any close friends. Her family was distant. Her co-workers had become just acquaintances. How did this happen? She began to review old conversations. She noticed the pattern. Every time she made plans with friends, he created a last-minute drama. He didn't directly forbid it, but he arranged situations where she felt guilty for going, or he came along and was in a bad mood, ruining the get-together. With her family, there was always a negative observation after the visits. Nothing too serious. Just enough to create discomfort, until she stopped visiting to avoid conflict. Jung warned that this isolation serves 2 psychological purposes for the psychopath. First, it eliminates external witnesses who could see their behavior and warn you. Second, it creates complete emotional dependence. You become totally dependent on them for validation, companionship, a sense of reality, and without external references, it becomes increasingly easy to distort your perception. If you notice that since someone entered your life, your other relationships are systematically weakening, and that person always has reasonable explanations for it, raise the red flag. You may be being isolated by a covert psychopath, and the last 2 signs will reveal exactly how they keep you trapped, even when your gut feeling is screaming at you to get out. 6th sign: calculated alternation between idealization and devaluation. Carl Jung identified that covert psychopaths use what modern psychology calls the cycle of abuse. But they do it so subtly that you don't recognize it as abuse until you're completely ensnared. Here's how it works. In the beginning, you're idealized, placed on a pedestal. You receive intense attention, exaggerated praise. You're treated as special and unique. Jung would say they're creating a psychological fusion, eliminating your individual boundaries. You feel amazing. You've never been so valued, and you become addicted to that feeling. Then, gradually, the devaluation begins. Subtly critical comments, unfavorable comparisons with other people, withdrawal of attention, emotional coldness, and this hurts deeply because you're addicted to the idealization, so you do everything to get back to that initial state. You change your behavior, you try to please them more, you accept things you wouldn't normally accept. But here's the psychological trick that Jung identified: the idealization never fully returns. You get crumbs of it, sporadic moments where they're wonderful again, and these random moments are more addictive than constant rewards. It's the same principle as slot machines, intermittent reinforcement. You never know when you're going to receive approval, so you're constantly trying, and gradually, you accept levels of disrespect that your former self would never have tolerated. Jung warned, this isn't love. It's psychological conditioning. It's the systematic destruction of your self-esteem. And most disturbingly, you start to believe their narrative, that you're not good enough, that you're lucky they're still with you, that no one else would put up with. Or lies, designed to maintain control. A specific pattern that exposes this. Observe if there's a predictable cycle. Growing tension where you're walking on eggshells, never knowing what's going to set them off. Then an incident, an emotional explosion, or cutting coldness. Then reconciliation, where they're charming again and promise change. Then a temporary honeymoon phase, and the cycle restarts, usually faster each time. Jung taught, psychologically healthy people have emotional ups and downs, but there's consistency in their character. You know what to expect. With covert psychopaths, it's like living with two different people, and you never know which one is going to show up. This creates a state of constant hyper-vigilance that is psychologically devastating. If you've recognized 3 of these signs so far, you need to listen to the next one with total attention, because it's what allows everything else to work. 7th sign, complete absence of real growth or change. This is the most revealing. In the long term, Jung deeply believed in the process of individuation, the journey of becoming more complete, more conscious, more integrated as a human being. Normal people evolve. They learn from their mistakes. They mature. You look at someone 5 years later, and you see growth. But covert psychopaths never change. They might change their social mask, adapt their performance, but the underlying structure remains exactly the same. The same patterns repeat in all their relationships, the same toxic dynamics, the same manipulations. Only the scenarios and the actors change. And what's most revealing, they are incapable of true self-reflection. They might talk about personal growth, use therapeutic language, even go to therapy, but it's all superficial, performance, with no real transformation. Jung warned, the shadow that isn't recognized and integrated continues to control behavior. But psychopaths can't integrate their shadow because they can't admit that it exists. To them, they're always right. Any problem is always external, never internal. Let me give you an example that perfectly illustrates this. I knew a guy, let's call him David. David had 3 serious relationships over 10 years. In all 3, the partners eventually left him, reporting the same behaviors: excessive control, lies, isolation, emotional manipulation. And in all 3 relationships, David told the same story. The partners were unstable. They had psychological problems. They didn't know how to value someone who really cared. They couldn't handle a serious relationship. David's narrative was always of a misunderstood victim. There was never any real self-questioning about why 3 different people were reporting the same problematic patterns in him. Jung would say that this inability to engage in genuine introspection is a cardinal sign of a psychopathic structure. Because real introspection requires humility. It requires admitting faults. It requires recognizing that you've hurt others. And psychopaths are fundamentally incapable of that, not from a lack of intelligence, but from the absence of the internal moral structure that makes it possible. And I'm going to tell you something crucial that Jung discovered. You can't change a psychopath. You can't cure them. You can't save them with enough love. Because real change requires the desire to change. It requires recognizing that there's something to be changed. It requires feeling discomfort with who you currently are. And psychopaths don't feel that discomfort. They're comfortable being who they are. In fact, many feel superior, exactly because they don't have the moral restraints that normal people have. They see it as an evolutionary advantage, not as a deficiency. Jung taught that trying to fix someone like that isn't compassion. It's self-sabotage, because you'll spend years, maybe decades, waiting for a change that will never come, while your own life, your own journey of individuation is put on pause, and your process of becoming who you really are is blocked by someone who will never be who they pretend to be. Now you know the 7 signs that Carl Jung spent decades studying and identifying: excessive superficial charm, lack of real empathy disguised as concern, pathological lying without discomfort, zero responsibility for their own actions, gradual isolation from your support network, alternation between idealization and devaluation, and complete absence of real growth. If you've recognized several of these signs in someone, Your gut feeling was right from the beginning. That discomfort you felt wasn't just your imagination. It was your unconscious protecting you. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Trust what you feel. Trust what you see. You're not crazy. You're not being too sensitive. You're finally waking up. And before I show you exactly how to protect yourself using Jung's techniques, I need to pause for a moment. You just received information that most people will never have access to. Signs that Jung spent decades researching. Knowledge that can literally save you from years of psychological suffering. Damage that can take a lifetime to heal. And I want you to understand something important. This kind of content makes a lot of people uncomfortable. People who benefit from keeping others in the dark don't want you to know this. Every video like this is an act of collective protection. It's choosing truth over convenience. It's choosing to empower you instead of keeping you dependent. That super thanks button down there isn't just financial support. It's you saying, "This information is priceless. Keep revealing what others are hiding." It's you investing in your own protection and in the protection of other people who will watch this video because you helped spread this truth. Because the more people who know these 7 signs, the harder it becomes for covert psychopaths to operate with impunity. Knowledge is the only real defense against manipulation. And when you support this channel, you're saying, "I choose knowledge, I choose protection, I choose to no longer be a victim." You're no longer someone who can be easily manipulated. You're someone who protects themselves with awareness. If this resonated with you, if this changed your perspective, if this gave you the tools you needed, click on that super thanks button. Be part of the solution. Help spread protection instead of ignorance. Now let's talk about the practical protection techniques that Carl Jung developed. First, and most importantly, trust your gut feeling. Jung taught that the unconscious processes information that the conscious mind doesn't pick up on. That unexplainable discomfort around someone is your unconscious detecting inconsistencies between what the person says and who they really are, between the perfect persona and the hidden shadow. Stop rationalizing those feelings. Stop convincing yourself that you're being paranoid. Your body knows, your psyche knows. Start listening. When something doesn't feel right, it's usually because it really isn't. Second technique, observe actions over time, not words in the moment. Covert psychopaths are masters of words. They can say everything you want to hear, make beautiful promises, give emotional declarations. But Jung taught the real character of someone is revealed in consistent patterns of behavior over time. Observe what the person does when they think no one is watching, how they treat people who can't offer them anything, how they react when contradicted, how they handle responsibility when things go wrong. These unintentional actions reveal the real self behind the carefully constructed persona. If there's chronic inconsistency between words and actions, you have your answer. Third technique, keep your external connections strong. Jung warned that isolation is a primary psychological weapon of manipulators, so actively protect your friendships, your family, your support network. If someone in your life constantly creates reasons for you to distance yourself from others, see it for what it is: an attempt to cut off your external references to reality. People who genuinely love you want you to have a rich and connected life. They want you to be surrounded by love from multiple sources. Manipulators want a monopoly on your attention and validation. Recognize the difference, and when someone tries to isolate you, draw even closer to others. It's your most powerful psychological defense. Fourth technique, establish and maintain firm boundaries. Jung taught that individuation requires healthy boundaries, knowing where you end and the other person begins. Covert psychopaths test and violate boundaries constantly. They start small to see how far they can go. If you give in on small things, they gradually escalate until you're accepting things you would never accept before. So set clear boundaries from the start. It's not rude. It's not a lack of compassion. It's essential psychological self-care. And when someone reacts with exaggerated anger to reasonable limits, that tells you everything you need to know. Healthy people respect boundaries. Manipulators see them as obstacles to the control they exert over you. Fifth technique, work on your own shadow. This one is deep. Jung said that we recognize in others what exists in ourselves, consciously or unconsciously. If you haven't done the work of recognizing and integrating your own shadow characteristics, manipulators will use that against you. For example, if you have an unintegrated shadow of anger, they'll subtly provoke you until you explode, then paint you as out of control. If you have an unrecognized shadow of selfishness, they'll accuse you of it until you accept guilt that isn't yours to prove that you're not selfish. The more you know your own shadows and integrate them consciously, the less power manipulators have over you, because you're no longer projecting or being a victim of others' projections. And the most liberating technique that Jung taught, accept that some people won't change. Accept that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Accept that love doesn't cure psychopathy. And accept that leaving is not only acceptable, but necessary for your own psychological health. Jung said, people will do anything to avoid facing their own soul. That includes destroying anyone who is trying to help them see. Don't sacrifice yourself trying to illuminate those who choose to live in darkness. Your journey of individuation is sacred. Protect it, even if it means leaving behind people you loved. Because sometimes loving someone from a distance is the only way to love that doesn't destroy you in the process. Signs that you're applying these protections correctly. You feel less mental confusion. Things start to make sense. That fog of constant doubt about your own perception starts to dissipate. You feel more energy because you're no longer being drained emotionally by toxic dynamics. You reconnect with people you had distanced yourself from and realize that they weren't the problem. You start to trust yourself again, in your perceptions, in your feelings, in your gut feeling, and more importantly, you feel peace, not the peace of solving all the problems, but the deep peace of finally stopping fighting against your own sanity, of validating what you always knew but were taught to doubt. And if you've identified many of these signs in someone very close, what do you do now? First, document. Without the person knowing, start writing down behaviors, conversations, patterns, not because you're going to confront them, but because your memory is probably being distorted by constant gaslighting. Having an objective record helps you maintain clarity when the person tries to rewrite reality. Second, strengthen your external network before making any moves. Reconnect with friends and family. You'll need that support base. Third, plan your exit if it's a relationship. Covert psychopaths can become dangerous when they lose control. Do this carefully, preferably with professional help. And fourth, after you leave, don't look back expecting change. Don't believe in promises of transformation. Remember the seventh sign? They don't change. Any appearance of change is just another mask to pull you right back in. Be strong, be firm, protect the peace that you have finally won. Now head down to the comments and tell me, how many of these 7 signs did you recognize in someone? You don't have to name names. Just write the number. 1, 3, 5, 7. I want you to know that you are not alone in this. There are thousands of people watching this right now who have gone through the same thing, who felt the same confusion, who doubted their own sanity, and who are finally finding validation and clarity. Share your experience down below. Sometimes simply writing the number is liberating, because it's you admitting to yourself, it wasn't just my imagination, it was real. And that admission is the first step toward true protection. So comment now the number of signs you recognized, and if this video opened your eyes, comment with the eye emoji. Let's see how many people were blind and now can see. Your story might be exactly what another person needs, to finally trust their own gut feeling. And look, one last thing, Carl Jung taught that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You have just made conscious patterns that were operating in the shadow of your life. Now that you know, you have a choice. You are no longer a victim of forces you don't understand. You are a conscious human being who can recognize manipulation, who can trust their gut feeling, who can protect themselves. This doesn't make you cynical. It doesn't make you closed off. It makes you wise. It makes you aware. It makes you free. And psychological freedom is the greatest gift you can give yourself. So use this knowledge, apply these protections, trust what you feel, and always remember, your vision will become clear when you look inside your own heart. Jung knew this, and now you know it too. Protect yourself. You deserve authentic relationships. You deserve psychological peace. You deserve to be seen and loved for who you really are, not manipulated for who you can be useful to be. Thank you for watching, and never doubt your gut feeling again.